Well, welcome everyone to PhlattLine. I'm your host, Flat McLean, and today we have Stephanie Maier with us. And she comes to us from Florida, and we haven't had a representative from Florida on the show, and I'm glad that she's with us today. Stephanie, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Flat. It is so great to be here. I'm really excited. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Stephanie, what kind of brought you to the show and kind of your interest to join and share your story?
Well, I guess you found me based on my many posts on LinkedIn. I've been very vocal there because I like the discourse. I'm a big believer in free speech. And really that's kind of akin to everything that drives me. I believe that every single person born every single person created is created with a spark of divinity and limitless potential. And because of that, I value freedom most. And that's because whatever your dreams are, whatever your goals in life are, whatever kind of legacy you want to leave, whatever challenges you want to face and overcome, whatever good that you want to do in the world, you can't do it without freedom. So for that reason, I've spent my whole career really studying freedom, studying tyranny, studying what gives people the best chance to rise and become their highest and best self. And even what kinds of systems, economies, and governments are the most compassionate, because we hear a lot of talk about that. And so I teach people, hopefully motivate them and empower them to stand up against injustices and tyranny and stand for our God-given rights that allow us to rise to the best of who we want to be in the world. And that's kind of what drives me and excites me every day.
That's awesome. And I'm looking forward to getting to know how you got to that level and kind of what you hope to move forward to in the future. So thanks for joining the show, and I look forward to this. This is exciting. So Stephanie, just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of, your background. Where'd you come from? Where are you now? What did you do in life? Those types of things.
Well, I was born and raised in Fort Myers, Florida, and I can remember kind of always growing up looking at shows like Sesame Street and watching or drawing pictures in a coloring pictures in a coloring book. And if it was autumn, there would be autumn leaves. And if it was snow, there'd be a snowman in the coloring book, and thinking, where are these magical places that have all of these wonderful seasons and you can throw snowballs, because that wasn't what I had. So I always, from early on, had a desire to travel, which is how I think I ended up. Maybe I overshot the mark, I don't know, but I've lived in 14 countries and I've experienced wonderful, just incredible places, some of the most interesting places on earth, in my view, villages in Cambodia and all over Afghanistan and all over the Middle East and the Caribbean. Haiti, St. Lucia. I just love traveling and being a guest in someone else's world.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that you gain so much more than you can ever possibly impart, that in some ways I feel like I've just been lucky enough to be a tourist on this earth, and God is just showing me some of his most beautiful creations and some of his most amazing humans that he's created. And so I just approach every day with gratitude that I've been able to do that.
That's beautiful. In your travels to all of those places, have you found differences among people or similarities, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, that's funny. I get asked that a lot, and it's a great question. And I would say, in some ways, of course, we're very different, right? People approach problem solving. I find that kind of interesting. People approach problem solving and they go through a different cognitive process depending on where you're from and what kind of political and economic system you grew up in. So I'll give you a very quick example of that, which is in America, we kind of take it for granted that if you want to resolve conflict, you vote. Even as a kid, it's like you do one potato, two potato, or you do rock, paper, scissors, and you do vote. Who wants hot dog party and who wants pizza party in class, and you vote. And then if your way didn't go the way you wanted, you're like, oh shucks, we'll vote next time. And so we've just learned that voting is, when it goes right, is a way to resolve conflict. And in countries that are more tribal, for example, Tajikistan, I lived in Tajikistan, which is in Central Asia. It's on the northern border of Afghanistan. And they've gone through a number of civil wars. They've been invaded, run by Russia, run by, Taliban, maybe some of the history. Their view of voting, or democratic problem solving is a better way of putting it, is going to stir up trouble. It's like, what are you doing? Don't start, asking people what they think. That's just going to cause problems. We have a chief, or we have someone who's in charge, and the way to resolve conflict is to go along with that view, right, with your leader. And so it's interesting when I've traveled to countries like that, where the West has tried to install democracy or democratic forms of government and free market principles, because although I do believe that is the best of all the flawed systems we have for people to be their highest and best, it's not as easy as all that. So from that point of view, we're all very different. And we're different in really cool ways, right? I love experiencing different food, different music, different forms of dress, different languages, all of that. Traditions especially are fun. But really, I think what's more important, and on a much more human level, is we're really all the same. No matter where I go, no matter what kind of government, no matter whether it's a rich household, a poor household, no matter what is going on in a particular country or city or town or village, everybody really just wants to be safe. They want their children to be better off than they were, and they want to be understood. I think people have a yearning inside to have connection with other people. And a lot of our conflict rises out of a feeling of not being understood. And it's misexpressed as anger. But I think that's the essence of who we all are. And everywhere I've gone so far, that there really hasn't been an exception. And the other interesting thing, too, is every single person I've ever met in these places, the exception is actually here in America. But every other place I've ever gone, everyone has a yearning to be free, to say what they want, and to have a say in who's governing them. And so that's very interesting, because a lot of those people don't have that, but they know it. They know they don't have it, and they know it's not quite right, even if they're accepting it. So it's interesting to me that we take those freedoms for granted here in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And what brought you to living in those nations, to visit with those people and to be amongst them and to learning of their systems and things like that?
Yeah, well, as I said, I'd always wanted to travel and experience life in other places that was different from what I had known, because I think that's how you, at least in my case, that's how I could learn and grow. I think it's helped me at a young age. I didn't have the kind of compassion that I've developed in my life because I've lived in other places and really learned to have gratitude. I guess I just wasn't as enlightened, maybe as some people are coming right out of the womb. I had to see life for myself to realize just how good I have it. And so I think that was very valuable for me. That's where I say you gain so much more than you can possibly impart, even though I was in these countries presumably to teach others.
Yeah.
So I would see it more as an exchange of knowledge than it was just strictly a one-way street, always. But my first experience going overseas was really after I had worked in a high-level campaign here in the States. I was actually working for the Republican Party of Florida on the Victory 2000, which was the recount in 2000, the presidential recount. And I was part of that and looking at these hanging chads and dangling chads and all this craziness in the news for young people who can't remember that, but believe me, it was crazy. And after that, I had an opportunity to go to Cambodia and train females who were running for parliament there. And I interviewed, and I got the opportunity. I went over there, and it was very interesting because some of those women were at the highest levels of government. There were a couple members of the royal family who had attended my training. And in that same room were ladies who were from rural villages who didn't even know that their names were on the ballot. Because of quotas, every village had certain amount of representation of females, and their husbands put their names on the ballot. So they didn't even fully understand why they were there. So that was a really interesting training to try and approach, how am I going to address all these different levels, and give them all something to take away that's going to be useful. That was my first experience, and it was very transformative for me. And I knew I wanted to do that in one way or another for the rest of my life. And I pretty much did until I came back to the US around 2010.
So you were gone for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, it's learning from other people is pretty addictive if you're open to it.
Yep.
Right. I think that's what gives you more humility too. And the more humility you have, the more free you are. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it's true. And it's interesting too, because I think the current atmosphere in our domestic politics and American politics, and why it's so divisive, is because there's a twisted, distorted view of connection, which is, you mentioned a phrase, is your background similar to mine, and how can we connect, right? And I would submit to you, you and I'm sure we have a great deal in common, but the distorted view of connection today is superficial connectivity, right? Is your skin the same color as mine? Do you have the same economic class as I do, and therefore you understand me because I'm rich or because I'm poor? Do you have the same political party affiliation as I do? Are you male or female or whatever, label you want to give yourself? I only want to see people who share that same label. And if you don't have that label, you don't understand me. And I think that's missing the mark, and it's missing the real gift of human connection, because what human connection is about allows every one of us to find connection with one another, because we shouldn't be looking at physical or external and immutable attributes, superficial attributes. We should be looking at humanity, the humanity in us. Have you, what is the pain you felt in your life? I felt pain too. Where have you felt like someone let you down? Where have you let someone down? I can think of examples where I've let someone down, and I needed to make it right. Where have you had your greatest challenges? Some of the questions that you ask on your show, which are so compelling, these are the kinds of things that provide human connection, and not just these superficial labels that really diminish us all. And I think rob us of our connection. It's actually quite the opposite of having connection. So I seek deeper connection than superficial labels and boxes that we can put ourselves in. But that is where I get on my soapbox about cultural Marxism and Marxist ideology invading all of our institutions, because Marxist ideology seeks to and has written a great deal about it. And historically, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels wrote a lot about how to divide people. And so did other organizations that came to the United States with the idea of instituting socialism or Marxism or some other top-down style of government that seeks to tell people, we know what's best for you, and you need to listen to us because you're some kind of victim, and you can't make it on your own. You need a big savior. And that to me is a dark, demoralizing message. And it's honestly, it's evil. And so this is just another one of the arrows in my quiver that I'll always be, taking out and talking about everywhere that I see it, because I want people's eyes to be open to the truth so they can be really at peace and really pursuing their gifts and talents that God gave them.
I love that. And thank you. I'd give you a standing ovation, but, we're still kind of going here. When you go travel and you go do your speeches and you go do your interviews and your liberations, what are the main five topics that you typically talk about?
Oh, 5 topics. Okay. I would say overall, for sure, one of the biggest ones is the history of how Marxist ideology came to infiltrate Western culture and American institutions in particular. So to go back to your 5, that's one. Um, Interestingly, what goes right along hand in hand with that is talking about the exceptionality of our American founding, why our country truly is exceptional. And that's not to debase any other country. As you know, I've traveled many places and I celebrate other cultures. But, I tell people God made Israel because he loved people and he wanted a relationship with them. But people made America because they loved God and they wanted a relationship with him. So from the Mayflower Compact, when the Pilgrims landed and dedicated the earth, the shore that they landed on, to God, to say we're forming a colony, we're going to form a group of people whose object is to glorify you. That was the start of God honoring our country, and if we would form it in a way that is reflective of his good governance, his vision for good governance. And so from that time on, our founders came along and they were very enlightened. They never said they were perfect. They were flawed men. They were typical for their time. And, our founding documents say, in order to form, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, right? It doesn't say a perfect union. But what they did was they set it up in a way that we could aspire to the ideals of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence by having open and robust debate, by saying to each other, what is happening here is not okay, and we can be better, and we can correct this. And that's why we have 27 amendments in our Constitution that abolished slavery, that enacted civil rights, that allowed women to vote, on and on and on, right? Because we see where there were gaps in our original plan. It was the founders who allowed that to happen. So contrary to what a lot of people think, America is not a dark place that promoted slavery. It's actually a country that ended it. So this is something that I think people need to have honest and accurate conversations about, to say, why is America exceptional and why should we preserve and actually honor and utilize the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and lean into our founding documents in order for all of us to have the best society possible, not tear it down, but to raise it up. So those are the 2 main things. And then I do other speeches that I do actually are much more practical. So I teach people grassroots organizing skills. And it's funny because the first time that people really started learning the term grassroots organizing was, I think, when Barack Obama came on the scene, and he was a grassroots organizer. So there you go. There's a connection we have. But of course, I'm not organizing for around the same ideas or principles, but I do teach people skills. How do you share your story? How do you have good communication? How do you organize an advocacy campaign for an issue in your community? How do you testify at school boards? How do you really make a difference? And the most important thing about that is being intentional in what you're doing. A lot of us just go around as keyboard warriors, or on our phones, arguing with old high school classmates on Facebook and putting lots of exclamation points, and we become emoji masters. But that's not really making change. The way to make change is to sit down and be intentional, to take your ego out of it, to really remember whatever it is, your North Star, whatever that is. And everything you do should be aligned with that North Star and moving you and everyone around you towards it. So there's a lot we can do to be better about the way we communicate in our country and how we debate our differences. And so I talk about all of those things. And I think those are the 3 that really come the most to mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those are pretty big, heavyweight topics, which I'm pretty sure you find branched subjects and discussion from as well.
Yeah, and I guess I would also add, sorry, that a lot of what I do is for secular audiences. And so in the last couple of years, it's really been, God's really laid it on my heart to be more vocal and open and intentional about my faith and my Christianity. So That's what caused me to write my book. I don't know if it's backwards, but to write my book, The Righteous Fight, a children's book too, about why God made the earth, why He made people, and the meaning of everything.
Oh,
So,
cool.
had a couple.
Mhm.
And to start talking to pastors and faith-based communities, and really saying to the church, to people who are Christian, we are the stewards of God's good governance. We're the stewards of our inalienable rights. And the reason that America, for the first 100 years or so, was more cohesive, believe it or not, even though we had lots of conflict, everybody, whether you were Christian, Jewish, or an atheist for that matter, everybody in America could agree on some basic principles of right and wrong and basic ideas of what comprise reality. So everybody would say, well, sure, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't cheat, right? Well, those are all rooted in the Ten Commandments. So Christians were the stewards of those principles, our Judeo-Christian values. And it was when we started seeding those values, watering down our beliefs, and retreating from issues of the day, retreating from politics, and retreating from public discourse, that our culture was taken over by people who didn't believe in those values and who saw other values that are not good, they're divisive. And so that's the other area that I really focus on. And that's really my biggest calling, I think, now, is because I think that's the most compassionate. Freedom is the most compassionate, not top-down systems that centralize and coerce you into being a good person or doing the right thing.
Yeah, I love it. And freedom is such a broad discussion, because you have, like you mentioned, freedom of speech, and there's freedom of religion, there's freedom of expression of who I am, and that's interesting. So from your experiences and all of the things that you've gone through, especially in your travels, in your advocacy work, and what would you consider to be one of the most challenging experiences that you've gone through, and how did that affect you?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that, and I'm not someone who burns every bad experience into my mind so that every year on that date I can relive it and have a bad day. I know people like that,
Hmm.
and I'm very grateful that I'm not like that. I learn from my mistakes, and I will say, I think the majority of challenges that I've had in my life have been, at least in some part, if not in large part, due to my own decisions. And I think that's something that's important, is to be really honest and own your mistakes. So I learn from them, and then I move on. And I think that's very important. I believe one of the greatest gifts that God gave us is He created us as creatures of potential. And that's really to say that we don't need to be defined by our past, and we're not limited in our future. So if you understand that you are responsible for everything that happens to you, then you can overcome anything, and you can move on without identifying as a victim your entire life, or identifying as having been wrong. And what I mean by that, a lot of people, it's a controversial statement, and I say it that way for a reason. It's a provocative statement. Say you're responsible for everything that happens to you, because people say to me, well, that's not right. People get raped, that's not their fault. People get cancer, that's not their fault. That's just not true. And I say, it is true. And then here's why. Because responsibility does not equal fault. So I use the example when I'm talking to people in a room, I'm giving a speech, and I say, for example, if someone opened that door and they put a baby in a basket in this room and left, that is not our fault. But collectively, every one of us is responsible for how we handle that situation. And that's true for everything. So if you embrace that, that's actually empowering, because now I have choices to make, and I can decide what I do with what happened to me. And there's a saying, I don't know who said it, but I never forgot it. There's what if the worst thing that ever happened to you could be the best thing that ever happened? And that's a really hard one to get your mind around.
Hmm.
But I think it's challenging if you really think about it. And another thing is, when we talk about potential, there's a saying that the definition of hell is the person you become gets to meet the person you might have become. So, meaning at the end of your life, the person you are based on all of your choices gets to meet the person you could have become if you had leaned into God's vision for who you could be. And I find that very interesting. So something to ponder. But so for my bad days, I don't mark them off and remember them every year, but I do think that they've led me to who I am, and they'll continue to lead me to who I am, as long as I have the humility to own my choices and grow from them.
Sure. And that's
Yeah.
respectable. You mentioned something that I thought was interesting that kind of sparked my thought. Um, as a Christian, we read in the scriptures of God and how he works. And you talked about fault and responsibility. And that kind of goes into something that he mentioned. He says he created things to act and things to be acted upon. And so that's either, are we someone who's going to act, or are we going to be someone who is acted upon? And hopefully not the latter.
That's
So,
right. That's great. Absolutely. And that's, again, see, that's an empowering statement to say, I can engage in the world. I understand that when I go out in the world and meet all kinds of different people and even animals and, lions, whatever it is, right?
yep,
I'm taking certain risks, and that's okay, because we all have a certain amount, we all have dignity and we all have value. And some people are on different areas of the path in their walk to enlightenment, right? So we have to understand that, give ourselves a little grace and give other people grace too. That doesn't mean you can't disagree. I disagree with people on LinkedIn all the time, but I don't, and everywhere else too. But I don't engage, or I try not to engage in just vitriol and nasty labeling and judgment, right? I can judge people's opinions just as they can judge mine, but that doesn't mean I'm judging them. So I think that's an important distinction if we're going to get beyond disagreement and get anywhere.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too, because everything that has to do with freedom and evolving into your fullest potential really does come back to godly principles. God tells us to die to self, right? We have to die to self. Well, what does that mean? It really means get your ego out of things. Ego gets in the way of truth. It gets in the way of problem solving. It gets in the way of human connection. If you get your ego out of it, it's so freeing. It's actually freeing. And the other thing that's really freeing is just owning up and laying out your failures in life. There's almost nothing I can think of that somebody couldn't tell me, hey, if I imagine being interviewed by some national journalist, and they put a microphone in my face and they exposed whatever they thought was my biggest failure, there's almost nothing they could say that I wouldn't think, yeah, oh yeah, right? How about that thing? Wow, was that dumb? I don't feel any bad thing about it, because whatever my mistakes are, I try and learn from them. So the more you get your ego out of things and you die to self and you just give it to God, the more you are free. It's funny how it works.
Yeah.
Because ego makes us want to push forward. We think we're in control, but really the way you get more control is by giving it up.
Yep. Which is a hard perspective.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself successful at this point in time in your life? Kind of the things that you've gone through and what you've experienced. Would you consider yourself successful?
I guess. I mean, I would never consider myself done. I'm a work in progress. So successful in some things and not successful in others, I think, is probably the most accurate, right? I'm always trying to do things better. I tell everybody when I sell one of my books, I tell them, put my email is in the book. Please email me feedback. I want to know what helped you, and I want to know what didn't. I always want to be better. Same with trainings that I do and speeches that I do, right? To create value in the world, you have to be ready to hear what didn't work if you're ever going to do it better. So I think I'm successful compared to some, but you're also always competing against yourself and your best score, right? I grew up as I was a competitive gymnast in my youth, and that's a very individual sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I identify with that because in gymnastics, you're competing against your own best score or your own ability, right? It's not about like a game of chess or even football where you have two teams. It's just you out there and you have to do better than you did before. So I think that's how it is in life. I'm always trying to be more successful than I was in something. And the other thing is life isn't, as much as we would like it to be, I guess it's not always a trajectory like this. It's more like this. And hopefully you're still going up.
Yes.
You're not going like this. You don't want to be on a roller coaster, but it's a little bit of trial and error, right? That's how we learn. That's how brains learn. That's how we make connections and form new synapses, is by trial and error and failure. So, Thomas Edison said he held at one point the most patents ever. It was almost 2,000 patents. And someone asked him, you've tried something like 2,600 times to create the light bulb and you haven't gotten there yet. Aren't you tired of failure? And he said, on the contrary, I've learned 2,600 ways that it won't work, so I'm that much closer to the way it will work. That's the way he looked at it. So I think that's the way to look at life and success. And so hopefully I'm moving forward and bringing some people along with me, inspiring people.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I know that at least you'll be able to touch some of the audience here.
I hope so.
Yes. I don't want to go over too much of your time, but I would love to hear what you would find to be one of your most rewarding experiences. Would you mind sharing something like that with the audience?
Wow. It's hard to think of a single event because a life well lived is going to have so many, right? And of course, the most obvious is when your children are born. So that's usually off the table. You're not allowed to use that one. So I have 2 children. I won't use that one. But okay, so not to try and wax too philosophical, but I think I have to, because honestly, the things that are my greatest failures are also my most rewarding experiences. And I'm not trying to be cheeky, but it's true. The times that I've made the greatest leaps in my life and my understanding to get to the next level have been when I've fallen sometimes, I think, the furthest, and I've allowed God to groom me, and prune. I think there's something in the Bible about pruning you, right? You need to be shaped and molded to grow properly. And when you get out of your own way, that can happen. But I guess to try and give you, a regular example, I've had some great political experiences. One of the worst days was actually 9/11. I was working for the Republican Party of Florida, and the president was in Sarasota speaking at a school that day. And because I was from Fort Myers and Sarasota was one of my counties, I drove up there to work that event, and I was just one of many of the dozens and dozens of people up there who were in the school that day, just helping in whatever way I could. And so I was there when that happened, and I got to see it from a unique perspective. So it was one of the worst days, but it was also one I'll never forget, because I have a perspective that I think is different than a lot of people who are just reading it from the outside. So that was interesting. But by far my greatest joy has been all the people I've met in all the countries and across America every day, whether I'm talking about my book or I'm speaking, but just hearing everyone else's stories and what they're doing. And it's just so inspiring to see all the amazing, creative, innovative, wonderful people that are out there doing things every day who aren't celebrated. We tend to watch all the negative stuff and we're not celebrating the good stuff, but it's really out there and it's happening en masse. We have a wonderful country. We just need to connect more, I guess, to bring it full circle to where we started. Right? Talk more.
Talk more. Let's have good communication.
Yep, that's right. Amen to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. The 2 final questions that I typically ask, is what have you learned about yourself, and what do you hope people learn about you or from you?
Okay, what I've learned about myself is I think I am usually my own worst enemy. The one thing that stops me from success in any endeavor is usually me. And when I can get out of my own way and let God do his work, things are almost effortless. And it's when I try to force it and do it my way that it's really difficult. So that's something I've really learned in life, and I am better than I was 10 years ago at acknowledging that and leaning into the path of least resistance and trusting what's going to happen. And hopefully 10 years from now, I'll be even better at it. So that's that. And what was the other one?
What do you hope people learn about you and from you?
I hope people, if I could wave a magic wand, I would want everyone I come into contact with to catch the amount of passion and just incredible joy I feel for the potential of every human being. I wish everyone, just like a virus, I wish when they touch my hand that they get it and they go, I can't wait to get up every single day and get busy because there's an amazing world out there and I have to get to it. I wish everyone would catch that. And I try and do it when I'm meeting people and I'm speaking. And part of it is I really hope that they understand why I do talk a lot about negative issues because I think they have to be exposed. And part of the way I explain it is you can't have light if you don't go into the darkness and bring light there. So we have to do that. We have to go into the darkness and fill it with light. But that means going to the darkness. So I guess that's what I want people to understand about me and what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to empower and equip them to do too.
I love that. Thank you so much, especially for your time and attention to these questions and just kind of sharing yourself and the passion that we can feel from you. We don't necessarily have to touch your hand to feel it, so at least you know that that's a thing.
I'll wave it across the screen to your viewers. From me to your viewers.
Yes, lovely. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I may not have asked about?
Oh, probably a lot. I guess maybe I'll come back another time, right? And we can unpack something else because life's always changing. So there's always something new to talk about. But it's been helpful as always for me. I learn the most and get the most out of conversations like this. So I want to thank you. And I want to thank you for everything you're doing for your viewers. I love your show. I love what you're about. And I think you're helping to spread goodness and wisdom. So thanks for allowing me to be a part of it.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that. I do. So if everyone who has watched this, if you have any questions for Stephanie, leave your questions down below. And what we'll do is we'll see if we can get her back on to answer some of those questions, maybe a Q&A style as you've offered your time to do so. And we'll just kind of reach back out to you and get you back on the show.
That would be fun. Q&A is fun. I like that.
Yeah, I like that. Yep, so let's see if we can do that. Let's see if we can get the audience to ask you a couple of questions, maybe your most pertinent topics that you just struggle with, or, I don't know, whatever they want to ask, we'll just kind of go from there.
Thanks, Flatt. That's great.
You're welcome. So thank you everyone for joining us today and finding out who is Stephanie Maier. We got to learn who she is and the things that she enjoys and is passionate about. Thank you, everyone.